So today is Mother's Day, and so I want to focus today on God's design for the family, because families are important, amen? I was listening to an old sermon of Billy Graham, and in the sermon he said, you know, the family is the building block of our country, and it really is. Unfortunately, there's a few missing blocks right now in our country. But you know, a mom does so much. The importance of moms in our families cannot be overstated. I got an example of this. Maybe this was like it was in your house at one time. This couple, mom and dad, were watching TV, and mom said, "I'm tired, it's getting late, I think I'll go to bed." She went to the kitchen, she made sandwiches for the next day's lunches. She rinsed out the dessert bowls. She took meat out of the freezer for the supper the following evening. She filled the sugar container. She put spoons and bowls on the table and loaded the coffee pot for the next morning. Then she put wet clothes in the dryer, a load of clothes in the washer. She picked up some things on the kitchen table. She watered the plants. She emptied the waste paper basket, and she hung up a towel to dry. She stopped by the desk, wrote a note to the teacher. She pulled a textbook out from under the chair. She signed a birthday card, expressed and stamped the envelope, and wrote a quick list for the supermarket, which she put near her purse. Then she put moisturizer on her face. She brushed and flossed her teeth and trimmed her nails. And her husband called out, "I thought you were going to bed." "On my way," she said. She put some water in the dog's bowl. She put the cat outside. She made sure the doors were locked. She looked in on each of the children, turned out a bedside lamp. She hung up a shirt, threw some socks in the dirty laundry basket. She had a brief conversation with the one child still up doing homework. In her own room, she set the alarm, laid out clothing for the next day, and added 3 things to her list of things to do for the next day. At that time, the husband turned off the TV and announced to no one in particular, "I'm going to bed." And he did. Are you guilty? You know, there's many forces changing families today, and what does a family look like? It looks different than it used to, so I'm going to, in just a minute, show several pictures of TV families in the different years, and you tell me the name of the family. What family was this? It was the Cleaver family. Her name was June Cleaver. She had perfect hair and makeup, spotless kitchen, dressed like a party hostess, even when she cleaned the house, and she wore a pearl necklace when she was gardening. What about this next family? What was the name of them? That was the Bradys. Carol Brady was the mom. She was a stay-at-home mom, but she was also a freelance writer, a sculptor, and a singer. Okay? Not as good as the Partridge Family singers, but she was good. I don't know if you remember this family. The Cosbys were popular. Her name was Claire Huxtable. She was a lawyer, and he was an obstetrician. Both made up, but that's what their roles were on the show. Now, this one, you probably got a little help here because it's got the names on it. Now, Marge Simpson was actually a really good person. In the show, she takes care of her family. She was level-headed, forgiving, and loving. She even encouraged church attendance by her family, which is pretty rare. All right, now, this family you may not remember. It was called Malcolm in the Middle, a show that our family watched sometimes. And they never shared the last name of the family, which is really strange. But the mother's name was Lois, and his name was Hal. Lois was hot-headed, stubborn, intelligent, decisive, and she worked at the Lucky Aid drugstore. Anyway, that's a blue-collar family. And then this last family, which is recently the modern family, okay? Claire Dunphy had an obsession with being right and she was angry, paranoid, and freaked out a lot. So those were the different examples of families that we've seen in our culture over the last number of years. But the Bible talks about the purpose of a family and what it's about, and I want to look at that for a few minutes. Genesis 2:18. In the very beginning, God made everything. He made the trees, the animals, the stars, the ocean. Everything was good until this verse. And the Lord said, God said, it is not good that the man should be alone, and I will make a helper comparable to him. And then in verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, this is read at a lot of weddings, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And so from the very beginning, we notice two things. Number one, the family was God's idea. From the beginning, God wanted us to be part of a family. Do you know what we all have in common this morning? Everybody here had a mother. You may not have been raised by your mother, but you cannot make it in this world unless you're born. I mean, even Jesus was born from a mother. So we've all had mothers, and the family was actually God's idea. We read about it here in Genesis. Second, people are made to be connected with other people. We've been designed with that void in us that we want to be connected to another person, and the family is what we're born into, a place for connection. And so I want to look at what the Bible says. What's a family for? What's God's design for family? You know, unfortunately in our world today, I feel like for many people, the family is just a place or bed and breakfast. I've known couples who slept in different rooms on different floors. The husband kind of had separate checking accounts, lived in the basement area, had his own refrigerator, bought his own groceries. I've seen families where the kids just come and go, don't really talk to anybody. They just exist. It's like a bed and breakfast. That's not what family is for. What is a family for? Well, let's look at four things. Number one, a family is to be a shelter in storms. You know, we all have storms in life because life can be tough. And the Bible says rain falls on the good and the bad. All of us go through times of instability, struggles. You know, when I was a kid, you know, we went through a lot of struggles, but the family can be there for us. Proverbs 14:26 says this, whoever fears the Lord, this is a parent who respects and honors God, has a secure fortress. That's their home. And for their children, it will be a refuge. And so a family is supposed to be a refuge for the kids and the family when they go through struggles and storms like change. You know, from the time I started school until I graduated, I went to like 10 different schools. We moved around a lot. But you know, the home never changed. We had a different place to live, but we still had, you know, I still had the same parents, same brothers and sisters, which I could have traded every once in a while for. But that gave me stability. That's so important. When you go through tough things, when you go through change, you have some stability there. Also, when you go through failure, you know, you're not always going to win. You know that. There's going to be times when you lose a job, where you don't get an A, maybe you fail a class. There's going to be times when you have something happen to you and it's a tough thing, maybe you're a teenage girl and you get dumped. How important is it for her to go home to her daddy and her mama that love her? They give her that security. You know, when you go through failure, to have that for you, to strengthen you. Ecclesiastes, one of the wisest people ever was, Solomon wrote this, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, One will lift up his companion, but woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help up. And so this idea of being connected when you go through struggles, to have somebody there for you. And I realize that's not been the experience for everybody here, and it's not your experience right now for some of you. But this is the way God designed it, because he knows we need that when we go through those kinds of failures. Rejections. Sometimes you're going to have rejections in life. Sometimes the things that you want are not going to work out. Even when you're young, sometimes especially when you're young, kids can be ruthless. Any of you are teachers, you know what I'm talking about. I think sometimes that many people spend a lot of time trying to get over what happened in middle school. It's tough growing up. But you know, to have your family there for you, that even though if you face rejection, they love you no matter what. It's interesting that a lot of the board games we play, if you play board games, to win, you have to go back home. You have to get back home. And I think that's ironic, because I think that's what we need. We need a place of acceptance, not rejection, a shelter from the storms. Second, a family is a learning center for life. Think about all the things you learned from your family growing up. You learned how to walk. You learned how to tie your shoes. You learned how to, comb your hair. You learned how to read. You know, a lot of the things that you learned from your family that were very important to you. Psalms 144:12 says this, that our sons may be as plants grown up in their youth, that our daughters may be as pillars sculptured in palace style. This idea of growing in the family, that's where you're planted. And a family can be that for you. This is including grandparents to help that to happen. Luke 2:52, in Jesus' life, his family, he grew, and it says in Luke that Jesus increased in wisdom, in stature, in favor with God and men. And if you think about that verse, it includes everything about a human being. Jesus increased in wisdom, which is intellectual growth. He increased in stature, which is physical growth. He increased in favor with God, which is spiritual growth, and favor with men, which is socially he grew. And so out of Jesus' family, he grew, in all those different ways. And kids today need to have that base that they grow from. Isaiah 38:19 says, only the living can praise you as I do today. Each generation tells of your faithfulness to the next. So part of our roles, not only as human parents of kids and grandkids, but as, surrogate parents of children you may know, is to communicate to the next generation what it means to believe in God. It's kind of like a relay race. Okay? As you become an adult, somebody gives you a baton. You're not just supposed to win the race and come in and say, I won. No, you're supposed to run it and pass it on to the next generation. Pass it on to somebody else. You do that intentionally and unintentionally. Intentionally, you do what Deuteronomy says in 6, verse 6 through 7. These commandments that I give you today are to be here on your hearts, and press them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. And so we should teach young people. They're not going to know unless we teach them. And so out of the family, you teach them not only how to tie their shoes, but what does it mean to respect other people? What does it mean to honor your father and mother? What does it mean to tell the truth? Because not only are you teaching when you tell them, you're also teaching in your actions. If you do something dishonest, let's say you go to the movies and your kid is, let's say they're 13 and you tell the person at the counter, oh, they're 12, so they get in cheaper. Oh, what does that teach that kid? unintentionally, you're teaching them about honesty. Does that really happen? It happens all the time. And so to pass on to our next generation, what are we unintentionally teaching them about money, about sexuality, about by the movies we watch? If you have certain movies on your television and you don't flinch when things happen and you leave it on when they're there, what's that teaching them? I know parents that refuse to let their kids stay overnight with other kids. Why? Because they say, I'm not sure what they're going to watch. And not only TV now, it's the smartphones. The smartphones are everywhere. And people are looking at those all the time. And to really teach a kid, to me, you got to put that thing down. Okay? How many times do I go to the park and I see the caregivers with their phones instead of watching the kids or talking with the kids? You know, put it down and talk with them one-on-one. 3, a family is a place of joyfulness. How to make it clearer? It's a place of fun. Now, maybe it wasn't like that for you. Maybe it was more like boot camp. And your parents, maybe they were like drill sergeants. Remember the old Sound of Music movie? And the captain, you know, before Julie Andrews got a hold of him, he would blow the whistle and the kids would march in. That's not what a family is. Ecclesiastes 9:9 says this, enjoy life with your wife, whom you love. But we're too busy, too tired, too negative, too worn out, and too serious. Would it hurt you if you smile a little bit when your kids come home, your grandkids come home? How you doing? How's things going? You know, you can lighten up some. I mean, Ecclesiastes, the wisest person on Solomon said this, so I commend the enjoyment of life because there's nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat, drink, and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in all their toil, all the days of their life God has given them under the sun. You know, I got stories I could tell you about my kids, but I don't want to embarrass them. They're probably going to watch this. John probably is going to watch this later this afternoon, so I'm not going to embarrass him. But I do have this story from Chuck Swindoll's book, You and Your Child. He tells this story. He had, at this time, a 4-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy. And he and his wife had noticed that their table manners had become worse and worse and worse. And so they decided to do something about that. And so they sat down for supper. They were having chicken, had a big plate of fried chicken, and they were all hungry. And the dad said, okay, now listen, tonight, son, I want you to serve your sister chicken. And he said, well, look, it's right in front of her. She can just grab it. And he said, no, I know. But I want you to learn how to be, respectful. I want you to serve her chicken. So they prayed. And as soon as he finished praying, the little boy picked up that huge platter and he went over to his sister and he said, here. Well, she relished the attention. And so she took a long time picking out a piece. And she replied to him finally, I'd like the foot. And he shook his head and he said, there's not a foot. And he looked at his daddy and his dad said, well, listen, honey, just pick something else. Pick something else. And the boy says, have a wing. And she said, I don't want a wing. I hate wings. Okay, and what do you want? She said, well, give me the head. And he said, I don't want to have a head. And she said, well, just give me the hand. And, it was just a hilarious kind of experience, at the supper table. It's okay to have humor at the home, It's all right to have that kind of fun. There's a letter in the Bible, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. 3rd John has one chapter, and so the only 4th verse in it says, I have no greater joy than to hear my children who are walking in the truth. Does it give you joy? Do your kids bring you joy? Honestly, not always. Sometimes they don't. But we should be joyful, with the kids that God has given, and the ones in our church, we should be joyful for them. Psalm 127, 3-5 says, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is a man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in the court. And so to be joyful over your kids, to let them know that you're a person of joy. I have done a lot of funerals in my career, and especially in the last 14 years at this church. I buried a lot of your family members, and one of the things I've done with every funeral is I've met with the children or extended family, and I've asked them, what is the important thing you remember about your dad or mom or granddad or grandmom? I almost never get them telling me a lesson they learned out of the Bible. They'll usually tell me some kind of funny, crazy story that left an impression upon them that they'll never forget. A positive impression that they were a loving, good person. That's what we're leaving behind us in our legacies. And so be that kind of person. Number 4, the family is a launch pad. It's like a launch pad. Now, a launch pad can launch many things. Career, help a person find their way to become an independent, good citizen. But I'm focusing now on a launch pad for ministry. That family can be a place in way they first experience what it means to do things for other people for God. In 1 Corinthians 16:15, there's this verse, you know that the household of Stephanas was the first converts in Achaia. Now, this was not just one person, not just Stephanas. It was his whole household that came to be followers of God. And it says, and they devoted themselves to the service of the Lord's people. I urge you, brothers and sisters. And he talks about that blessing that family was. As a community, as a family, do you do things for other people? Do you model that? Do you help them to see themselves as being God's hands and feet? Years ago, in this community, and some of you may still live in the houses, but it used to be that when somebody built a house, their friends helped them. And a lot of people in this church, the house was built by different people in this church that helped to build the house. Now, it wasn't a $400,000 house. It may have been a $14,000 house. It might not have been the biggest house you ever seen, but it was a house that started them off. And it was a blessing to them because somebody came alongside them and helped, did that ministry. When my wife was growing up, her family, they did a whole lot of work to help others. And they rebuilt this church one time. They built a house that was down on the lake and some property they owned. It was a lot of hard work, but they did things together as a family. In my family, when my kids were coming along and they were young, we started a church. And we started the church basically with me and my wife and our 3 kids. And it was a lot of work. And we would do things to engage other people in the community. I can remember walking around pulling a wagon with my boys, and we go through a neighborhood and we put flyers on doorknobs. I look back at it and I think, wow, was that child abuse? I hope not. But they did it, and we would have a big to-do at the park, and they would enjoy it, and we saw that church grow, and they were part of that. And, I'm thankful now that my son Paul comes to church every Sunday with his wife and is active in church. I'm proud that my other son John is a youth minister at full-time at a church in Chapel Hill. They bought their first house and moved in it yesterday. And my wife went up there to help. And she's back. Anyway, she's very busy. But to see that the family is a launch pad for that, it helps them see what God may have them to do. And so by coming to church and not coming to church, by being involved in things to help others, you are teaching something. You are providing something for them that is irreplaceable. In my opinion, much more important than some of the other things that we give a lot of emphasis to. Acts 16:33, at that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. This is Paul and Silas. And the jailer, and he and all his household were baptized. You know, the whole family became part of this faith that the dad really received. And then he led them to the Lord as well. And that's so important in a family, that it's a launch pad to see them go to the next level in their faith. We are running a race. We're handing a baton. There's a great book called Covenant Marriage that talks about the purpose of marriage is to help each of you encourage the other in their faith. It's a great book. And it talks about how that was God has done. We're supposed to encourage our spouse to grow more than they are because we know them better than anybody else. Now, I don't know where you are today. Maybe you were raised in such a family that I've been describing. There's no perfect families. There's nobody here that's had a perfect family. But we serve a perfect God, and He has a plan for each of us. As long as you're breathing, He's got a plan for you. And so I pray that He works in your life as He has in mine, and that we can see families flourish in our church and in our ministry to this community.